Thank you very much. Minister, you're welcome to the House, and I, of course, welcome the bill. It's something I think campaigners of all ages have been waiting for many years, and we are excited to see things moving forward. But in being very positive about the bill, I think it's also important that we temper what we say with a suitably sombre and humble note in recognising where Ireland is right now. Ireland right now, as of last year, was the last in 15 EU countries on the environmental and climate aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals which are not mentioned in the bill, unfortunately. And with respect to my constituency colleague who spoke earlier, it is important to recognise, when we look at global emissions, China is well above the average per capita at 7.38 tonnes per person. But Ireland is at 8.32 tonnes per person, more per capita. And to put that in perspective, Malawi, which is a country I visited back in 2008 with TROCRA to see the devastating impacts climate change was already happening then, a decade ago, have 0.11 tonnes per person versus 8.32 tonnes for every person in Ireland. And I think it's just important, in response to that idea of we're small and we can't make a difference, to say we have a huge responsibility and a huge relevance, and we certainly need to do more. It's also important to emphasise that there is no status quo. So for those who kind of wonder about taking action and how fast we should take it, there is no status quo. We are facing a climate crisis where the situation is worsening. The ground is literally disappearing beneath the feet of people around the world. So there isn't an option to not do things. There isn't an option to go slowly and keep what we like about how things are now, because how things are now is going to change. And our only question is if we take positive action to ensure that we shape how things change, and we make sure that they change in a way that is equitable, that is environmentally sustainable, and which can actually lead to a decent quality of life for people all across this world. That is the choice. Not inaction, not staying the same. And Ireland is very late to start the transition that is needed, but the fact that we are late does not give us any excuse to lower our ambition. We need greater ambition, and we need to move faster. And that is why we cannot afford to have any more delays and any more loopholes and any more caveats that could stop us taking the action that we need. Minister, as a member of the JOCA committee, I was glad to engage with experts who contributed extraordinary insight, important information, and to engage in the very long process of pre-legislative scrutiny, addressing what I think were many of the crucial issues in the bill. However, let us be very clear, pre-legislative scrutiny is not a substitute for legislative scrutiny. Pre-legislative scrutiny is there as an enhancement of our democratic process, not as a substitute for it. And it is now in the legislative process that we need to fine-tune this bill so that it works. And currently, the bill lacks accountability, lacks legal clarity, and it lacks justice. The good news is many of the changes that would address these concerns are small changes in the text of the bill itself, which could be addressed and will, I hope, be addressed at committee and report stage in the Seanad. And Minister, I will be looking to you to address these issues with us and to make the necessary changes that ensure this bill is fit for purpose. I think that is what is owed to all those climate activists across the world and indeed to the people of the world. In terms of accountability, there is a concern in respect of the language which the department itself used in a recent High Court case to argue that the government was not a relevant body and did not have responsibilities. And so we have the language that was in the 2015 bill is still in this bill and is still in section 15 of this bill. And it is specifically in relation to Section 15, the duties of relevant bodies. Government of Ireland are not listed there. And I know, Minister, that the government are mentioned in Section 3 and 5, according to this bill. But that simply talks about such duties as they should have regard to the UN climate targets. But if they're not mentioned as a relevant body in Section 15, I worry that we continue with a legal ambiguity that a future government could, like this government, exploit in a legal case. So I hope we can address that issue. We need to address that issue. It's also important to note that the language, while we talked about complying, and Minister, you spoke repeatedly about complying in your introduction, complying throughout this bill is very often caveated with so far as practicable, which is frankly wide open to interpretation and to dilution of action. McAvoy versus Meath County Council previously found that have regard to is not a form of language which creates legal obligations. It is still throughout this bill in many areas. Crucially, in relation to the interim targets, the recommendation of the JOCA Committee, and again, Minister, you'll know we disagree as to the number of those recommendations that were taken on board and the extent to which they were taken on board. But to be very clear, this recommendation was not taken on board because the committee looked for a target in the bill for the government in line with the Scottish legislation and crucially for a minimum target. The target as suggested, concerns have been highlighted by Andrew Jackson and others in Climate Case Ireland. I'm sure we'll get to discuss them at length at committee stage. I'm still not entirely satisfied with the language that came through in the Dáil from the government. But a crucial point for me is this isn't a minimum target. Why are we tying the hands of the next government in terms of increasing the ambition by putting in legislation a target that is not minimum? It should be at least. It should allow for greater ambition over the next 10 years as we see the urgency increase. In relation to the limitation of liability, this, I think, is one of the most troubling clauses in the entire bill, and I think it's one that the public will be very concerned about because it effectively washes the hands of the government from accountability in terms of financial or other compensation or supports or recompense to individuals or communities who are impacted by climate change if the government choose not to take action under any of the provisions of this bill. And we're limiting that liability, bearing in mind, at the same time as we are adding new liabilities. The government want to add a new liability that didn't exist before for compensation to investors who may be, for example, affected by our climate action. So we're creating a greater financial risk that we don't need to create in terms of investors while diminishing our compensation to individuals, which again may be in breach of the European Convention on Human Rights. In the last 2 minutes, there are many, many more issues to discuss. I'm sure we will discuss them at committee stage, including data centres, biodiversity, and indeed LNG. But I want to focus on something that's possibly the most important to me, which is, and it was something we spent hours discussing at the Climate Committee, the definition of climate justice. And I will be frank that the definition of climate justice in this bill adds insult to injury to people in the developing world across to the people we spoke about in Malawi who have produced 0.11 tonnes per person. It is insult to injury. It simply suggests that insofar as practicable to do so, we might safeguard the rights. So again, rights are optional now as the most vulnerable persons and endeavour to share the burdens and benefits. We'll share the burdens further with them. It does not match the Mary Robinson Foundation definition because the Mary Robinson Foundation definition was very clear that common and differentiated responsibilities, that is the fact that those who have done the most to cause climate change have the greatest responsibility to reduce emissions, is core to climate justice. It does not reflect that, and it does not in any way reflect the definition that we put forward collectively as a committee. I think that these are important points, Minister, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed. In respect of just transition, it has been pointed out, there is no definition. That's missing. And I think it's something that stands out as an area for repair, and very strong and good definitions are available in other legislation right across the world, which we should be able to draw on. Lastly, I would compliment a measure which is biodiversity, which has got better recognition in the bill as drafted now, but I think it's important that we will follow through on that by ensuring that we do protect biodiversity and indeed proper environmental measures and policies in the round in the way that we take climate action. I've mentioned, and we will have a chance to discuss, I come to my end, in terms of LNG. Minister, I'd like if in your response at second stage, because I think it will help us as we go into committee stage, if you could clarify exactly why we don't have a ban on LNG infrastructure in this bill. Because I don't know what the legal arguments are, and I have seen no solid legal argument. And if the arguments relate to the Energy Charter Treaty, then let us hear that and know that for clear. And I'd like you to confirm whether that is or is not the case.
Thank you very much indeed,
Thank
Senator.
you.